Hey folks, Seth Leibson here. It's that time of year again. Guns Etc. huge anniversary event. This year it's on Saturday, October 24th only. There'll be tons of giveaways and one-day only discounts in the store. Over the years, this event has turned into a gathering of folks who love America and the right to bear arms. As you know, our world may dramatically change on November 3rd. Can you imagine what a Biden-Harris administration will do to the Second Amendment then? If you're concerned about that, make sure you visit Guns Etc. on Saturday, October 24th. For more information, go to gunsetcetera.com. And if you like these monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy October 16th, 2020. If you turned into the show yesterday, and in case you couldn't tell, I was arrested by a caller, Sandy, who asked, with all the buzz and energy electrocuting this country, and with all the implications of political socialism propelling itself more and more into our politics and policies, why is Joe Biden so unemotional, in some cases just so very unanimated? In part, I said, his need for Blair and blast was taken up by the mainstream media. Everything to them, every day, a crisis, a cause for panic. We're always on the eve of destruction. That's what the crisis industrial complex gives us, daily, hourly. They've taken up the fierce urgency of now, as it were. So Joe Biden need not. Even when there is no news, you'll see crawls across the screen that read, "Breaking news, jury still deliberating," as if it's breaking news. Americans are going to work, driving their cars. Breaking news, Americans cooking their dinners. Breaking news, Americans sleeping at night. The media, in a lot of senses, is doing Joe Biden's bidding, not asking him relevant questions, pampering him, giving him and his family passes they would never give and never do give to Republicans. You saw this last night. You see it everywhere. For the umpteenth time last night, even Savannah Guthrie asked Donald Trump to denounce white supremacists. The implication is he will not, or he is one. Both are false and have been covered by, asked and answered, uncountable times. But make sure and put it out there, NBC. You'll note this works the other way as well. No repeated questions to Joe Biden about things that have actually not been covered or debunked, though he says they have. Corruption and nepotism. Biden gets the luxury of saying once, a long time ago, it's been covered and debunked. And it never was. But it will never come up again, even as new and important evidence arises. So it then becomes the job of the media to cover that story up as well, if, say, the New York Post prints it, as if it didn't exist, and social media censors those who try to replicate it. Only some kinds of sirens can be heard, evidently. Only some flashing lights are allowed to be seen, and it's always in the service of the Democratic Party. And that's the funny thing. What's covered up has a lot of rings of veracity and truth. What the media continues to hound is actually false. It gets a little exhausting to continue to observe this. It's even more dangerous to live with it or under it. Meanwhile, you do see a fierceness and energy from Donald Trump because he sees what the stakes are. The sirens and roar from the left need not come from the Democratic nominee. They come from the streets, on the one hand, in riots, and they come from the media, on the other. Of course, Sandy was right to point out that in Donald Trump you see a lot of energy, some bridled, some unbridled. But that is, in times like these, I would think, what you would want. You don't get blaring headlines and excitations from news anchors and commentators that mayors and governors are buying into and adapting and adopting and promulgating Marxist messages. You don't see it as a major deal that the mayor of America's largest city dedicates municipal work to painting their slogans on the city's streets. You don't see astonishing moral indignation about governors and mayors or presidential candidates refusing to denounce such movements. Instead, you see outrage that Donald Trump will not embrace them. They have wonderfully pleasant-sounding names, after all, don't they? Anti-fascism, Black Lives Matter, progressivism. But we know the roots because the founders of these movements told us what they were trained in and what they believe. It reminded me of what Arthur Koestler wrote in The God That Failed. Quote, "They deal in slogans as bootleggers deal in faked spirits. And the more innocent the customer, the more easily he becomes a victim of the ideological hooch sold under the trademark of peace or democracy or progress or whatever you will. Close quote. If you know that over 700 police have been injured in these riots, over 30 people killed, almost 600 riots have taken place in the last several months, causing billions of dollars of damage, you know it only from places like these shows or from Donald Trump. That's a cover-up, too. Nothing to be exercised about. In Cambodia, people who wore glasses were targeted, lest they know something of their own, lest they learn for themselves. Today, Twitter does that for the Democrats, all in the name of fairness or accuracy or peace, democracy, progress, or what you will. By the way, Mr. President, will you denounce white supremacy? Reify that subliminal message enough times. Heck, do it so much it becomes liminal. Plant the subconscious message enough times and it becomes conscious. So what is there left for Joe Biden to do? It's not as if others haven't shouted out what they are doing, though, is it? Nancy Pelosi was proud to pose for the front cover of glossy magazines with self-described and proclaimed socialists running and winning their offices under the banner of the Democratic Party. She was proud to endorse them and give campaign donations to their re-election efforts. Joe Biden was happy to put those socialists on and in his campaign platform and policy committees, even agreeing to sign a manifesto with them, a manifesto with those who go out of their way to repeatedly praise the Castros of Cuba. But that, of course, doesn't make news. It is, in the words of one historian, the revenge of the ignorant over the educated. It's a great phrase, isn't it? The revenge of the ignorant over the educated. When the Marxism comes, when the socialism arrives, that is where you get the silence. That is when the media calls its own lid or puts the quietus on anyone who dares raise it or warn about it. But still, there it is. And it reminded me yesterday, enough to close the show with it, of the modus or modi operandi of every haunting feature of the socialist communist state. Dissidents went to gulags or were diagnosed with mental disorders, often called philosophical intoxication. In China today, you have the same, be it in Xinjiang province, with what is called disappearance. People just disappear. And you have it with what Brian Kennedy describes in his current Imprimis lecture, a constant monitoring of its people using the tools of social media with the aim of grading each individual based on his or her support of the regime. This exerts a chilling effect on the people, who seem to have decided to go along with their communist masters, lest they be excluded from whatever benefits they might enjoy from China's economic modernizations. In thinking of that other side of silence, the silencing, I was prompted to think of other kinds of noise that do eventually come out, reveal themselves. I mentioned Arthur Koestler above. He, with other ex-communists, wrote the book The God That Failed. But it is another ex-communist's book whose words I cannot get out of my head, and the noise he describes that underlies all those soothing-sounded slogans. Whittaker Chambers, in his book, Witness, he writes, quote, "There is one experience which most sincere ex-communists share, whether or not they go only part way to end of the question it poses or not. The daughter of a former German diplomat in Moscow was trying to explain to me why her father, who, as an enlightened modern man, had been extremely pro-communist, had become an implacable anti-communist later in life. It was hard for her to understand because as an enlightened modern girl, she shared the communist vision without herself being a communist. But she loved her father, and the irrationality of his defection embarrassed her. He was immensely pro-Soviet, she said, and then, you will laugh at me, but you must not laugh at my father. And then one night in Moscow, he heard screams. That's all. Simply, one night, he heard screams. A child of reason in the 20th century, she knew that there is a logic of the mind. She did not know that the soul has a logic that may be more compelling than the mind's. She did not know at all that she had swept away the logic of the mind, the logic of history, the logic of politics, the myth of the 20th century, with 5 annihilating words. One night he heard screams. What communist has not heard those screams? Execution, say the Communist Code, is the highest measure of social protection. What man can call himself a communist who has not accepted the fact that terror is an instrument of policy, justified by history and joined by the balance of forces in the social wars of this century? Those screams have reached every communist's mind. Usually they stop there. What judge willingly dwells upon the man the law compels him to condemn to death? The laws of nations or the laws of history? But one day the communist really does hear those screams. He's going about his routine party tasks. Suddenly, there closes around that communist a separating silence, and in that silence he hears screams. He hears them for the first time, for they do not merely reach his mind, they pierce beyond. They pierce to his soul. And he says to himself, those are not the screams of man in agony. Those are the screams of a soul in agony. He hears them for the first time because a soul in extremity has communicated with that which alone can hear it, another human soul. We read about that. We read about what the socialist state does, be it in China, the USSR, Cuba, or elsewhere, and we wonder why the quiet, why the complacency here. Well, if it wins here, I, for one, worry about those screams. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.